誠邀大家多多支持，加入我嘅收費頻道 Buy Me a Coffee 請我飲咖啡啦。你可以成為會員或者係成為支持者都得。咁嗰條連結呢，我就會貼喺下邊。咁希望大家多多支持，多謝晒。
到今時今日咧，仲有好多人咧都係未醒嘅。咁佢哋仲有好多人咧都係未知道，原來呢個主流傳媒咧報嘅新聞好多時候都係假嘅。主流傳媒唔係報新聞，而係一個大風向嘅，就係洗人腦，就係 program 嗰啲人嗰啲思想啊嘛。咁而家仲有好多人都未睇到呢一個事實。咁嘅時候咧，就好多啲上載評論員咧，都係跟住嗰啲主流嘅嗰種言論導向咧，就佢哋用假嘅新聞去做假嘅評論啦，係咪？唔係用假嘅新聞去做評論啦，咁佢哋個評論咧就係假㗎啦，係咪？咁但係咧問題係呢啲人咧，佢哋讀好多書嘅，係咪？咁所以佢哋有好多崇拜者，係跟住佢哋，係追住佢哋嚟聽嘅，因為傳統以嚟我哋都認為咧，嗰個人讀得書多咧就會識多啲嘢，咁佢個判斷力應該好啦咁樣。其實咧呢個咧就唔係必然嘅嚇，好多人咧讀好多書，但係咧就係越讀越蠢嘅，越讀咧就係越冇判斷力嘅。即係我哋以前咧有句話咧就係死讀書，讀死書，然後讀書死。即係以前嗰啲人咧比較有智慧，佢哋已經老早就睇到呢啲嘢㗎啦。咁包括就佛陀咧，亦都係講咧呢啲讀得書多嘅人咧，佢哋係有一個所知障嘅，佢哋以為佢哋自己識好多，其實佢哋唔識嘅。咁而家我哋睇到呢個現象咧，其實呢個教育機構佢係一個洗腦機構，佢係一個 program 人嘅思考能力。嗰個辨識能力同埋佢個知識範疇係一個咁嘅 program 人嘅機器嚟嘅。咁所以咧，如果話係越讀得多，嗰個教育程度越高咧，佢嗰個思想嗰個空間咧，嗰個靈活性咧係越少嘅。咁係咪全部都係咧？咁又唔係。咁有一啲人咧，佢哋係好心水清，佢哋嗰個辨識能力係好鋭利嘅，一聽到一樣嘢佢就即刻就會知道有啲嘢係唔妥嘅。咁呢啲咧就我哋當然係認為佢哋係唔同 frequency 啦，係咪？咁即係如果話你係俾呢一個三維度嘅 frequency 同一個頻率嘅話咧，咁你就會一直跟住呢啲主流傳媒同埋呢啲主媒嘅評論咧去走嘅。咁但係如果話好似我哋咁樣咧，我哋係反方向走嘅，咁我哋係唔會完全相信佢哋嗰種評論啦。咁嘅呢啲人嚟講咧，咁我哋呢個 frequency 就唔係呢個三維度嘅 frequency 嚟嘅嚇，你必須係唔同 frequency 你先至能夠睇到呢一個 frequency 有啲咩唔妥啊嘛，係咪？因為好多網友問我佢而家入咗五維度未啊？咁我唔知啊，我唔知你入咗五維度未啊。不過如果話你一直都係跟住呢啲名氣好大嘅主流傳媒嘅呢啲言論導向，咁你仲跟住佢走嘅話咧，咁你就未啦。咁就係咁啦。一個好明顯嘅例子咧，就係關於呢個俄烏戰爭嚇。咁主流咧就係從俄羅斯出兵咧，就已經係講俄羅斯會被打敗啦。咁嗰個美國咧呢個軍事強國咧就即係兩下手勢就會 KO 佢咁樣啦，係咪？咁即係一路都係有呢啲新聞，就10幾個月以嚟俄羅斯都喺度輸緊。咁但係佢哋即係點解係輸10幾個月都未輸嘅咧？咁仲喺度打緊嘅咧？係咩情況咧？從10幾個月話俄羅斯輸到而家都未輸，仲喺度打緊咧，即係覺得呢一種講法唔妥，仲係跟住嗰個朱媒嘅風向咧，就喺度咧就即係大風向。第一，佢哋可能個智慧有限，佢哋真係辨別唔到出嚟啊嘛。第二咧就係佢信奉主流傳媒，就好似信宗教咁啊嘛，你唔可以 challenge 佢，佢一定啱嘅咁樣嘛。第三咧就係呢啲全部都係臥底嚟嘅。佢哋就係大風向嘅臥底啊嘛，就係唔俾你辨識得到佢哋呢個主流嘅報導係假嘅，可能就係呢3個原因啦。咁仲有啲咩原因咧？我就未諗到啦。咁應該就係其中一範嚟嘅咁樣。咁所以而家咧就係即係大眾啊嚟講咧，就係俾呢一紮咁嘅名氣好大、有好多追隨者嘅一啲大 channel 嘅人咧帶住。咁樣咧就係佢哋係好難醒，冇辦法醒。 咁而我哋呢一邊嘅，因為我哋呢啲資訊反其道而行嘅呢啲資訊咧，就係被打壓嘅，所以我哋係冇辦法係即係可以 reach 到好多嘅聽眾嚇。咁唔緊要，但係醒咗嘅人永遠都係即係精靈嘅人咧，就係少數嚟嘅。庸碌嘅人咧就係大多數嚟嘅，呢個就係好自然嘅現象嚟嘅。咁但係咧，往往呢個世界改變咧，就係靠呢一批好少數嘅人去改變嘅。咁同埋咧，有好多尤其是係香港嘅 KOL 啦，係咪？黃絲啊，我可以講係黃絲呢邊嘅 KOL 啦，佢哋咧其實好懶，佢哋唔去做研究，唔去 find out 嗰個事實嘅真相嘅究竟，佢哋就只不過係根據嗰個主流傳媒佢點樣報咧，佢就去咁樣去分析俾你哋聽。咁個事實真相係點樣？佢哋唔去 find out，因為點解要花時間花精力去 find out 啊嘛？咁嘅時候，佢哋冇呢個時間同埋精力，因為佢哋日日都要上片，日日都要上10幾20條片啊嘛。咁如果唔上夠片，佢哋係營運唔到佢哋嗰個 channel 噶嘛，冇錢賺，所以佢哋係唔會去做呢件事。另外咧，就係去將個真相發掘出嚟咧，係好難嘅。咁所以咧，佢哋係唔會做呢件事。佢哋只不過係捉住香港人嘅心理，香港人仇中嘅心理，佢哋就係向呢一個方面咧就評論，即係投其所好。香港人你中意聽乜嘢，我就講乜嘢俾你聽嘅時候咧，佢哋就會有一大紮嘅呢啲聽眾。咁唔緊要佢講嘅嘢係唔係事實，譬如話而家俄烏戰爭咁樣啦，咁我哋仇中。我哋憎中國，咁如果話俄羅斯黐埋中國嗰度咧，你就係衰人。總言之，邊個黐落中國嗰度就係衰人。咁佢捉到香港人呢個心理嘅時候，佢一路咧就喺度灌輸呢一種思想啊，去 program 香港人嘅思想，仇中仇俄仇烏克蘭係正義嘅咁樣，將嗰個是非顛倒。咁一般嘅庸碌嘅大眾咧就。佢哋冇咁高智慧噶嘛，係咪嘅時候？佢哋呢啲所謂嘅呢個評論精英嚟講咧，佢哋點樣評論，佢哋就點樣信噶啦嘛，係咪？咁但係我哋係點樣能夠證明到我哋呢個所謂嘅陰謀論？佢哋係即係俾一個好難聽嘅形容詞俾我哋咧，就話我哋呢啲係陰謀論啊嘛，係咪？我哋呢啲唔係陰謀論，我哋呢啲係事實嚟嘅嚇。豬流嗰啲咧就係假新聞嚟嘅，豬流嗰啲咧係謊言嚟嘅，係大話嚟嘅，係點你哋嘅嚇，就係要侮辱你哋嘅智慧嘅。咁點解我哋咁有信心咁樣講？咁如果話就俄烏戰爭呢件事嚟分析嘅話咧，咁我哋首先要知道俄烏戰爭嗰個起源啊，個前因後果係點樣先。咁我哋好快咁樣啦，嚟首先就溫習下先嚇。咁但係呢個前因後果啊嗰啲咧，我已經 post 咗幾條片出嚟㗎啦。咁就如果話想了解詳細嘅話咧，咁你去睇翻我嗰啲之前 post 嘅片。但係今日咧，我就好簡單咁樣講一次。其實咧，嗰個衝突咧就早喺2014年嘅時候就係發生嘅。咁嗰個時候咧就係咁烏克蘭咧就有一個總統選舉啦，但係咧嗰啲人民就選咗一個咧親俄嘅總統出嚟。咁嘅時候咧，咁呢一個 high table 咧，呢個全球嘅政治黑幫勢力咧，就發動咗一場顏色戰爭，就係推翻咗呢個民選出嚟嘅親俄嘅總統。咁嗰一場戰爭咧，就喺個廣場嗰度咧，就點咗好多蠟燭。咁咧就好靚嘅嗰個鏡頭，咁而香港喺2019年嘅呢啲反送中嘅呢個運動嚟講咧，都有啲政黨咧係用咗佢呢條片，或者係用咗佢哋呢一個所謂嘅乜乜革命攞嚟係同大家打氣嘅。咁其實呢個顏色革命係索羅斯俾錢嘅，買充咗好多人咧，就喺度推翻咗嗰個民選出嚟親俄羅斯嘅總統嘛。咁個總統唔理佢係親邊一邊都好，但係佢係民選出嚟嘅。但係咧呢個係唔可以做總統嘅。咁佢又俾錢策動咗啲人民，就係推翻呢一個唔親 establishment 嘅總統。咁嘅時候咧，咁喺烏東地區咧，佢80%嘅居民都係俄裔，都係講俄羅斯話嘅。所以咧，咁佢哋有個明斯基條約啦，2014年咧，以法國同埋德國為首嘅，就代表就簽咗呢條明斯基條約，就係話要保障烏東地區嘅俄裔居民嘅安全。咁但係咧，德國嘅老麥大媽咧，佢親口承認咗喺 最近嘅有個訪問，佢就話嗰個明斯基條約咧，其實咧就係點普丁嘅啫，即係應承住你先咧，佢哋根本咧就係冇意思要去履行呢條明斯基條約。咁所以自從2014年咧，咁喺烏東地區嘅俄羅斯裔嘅居民就係俾烏克蘭嘅呢啲新納粹軍隊呢個 Azov Battalion 咧，就喺度不停喺度屠殺緊佢哋。咁所以咧就呢啲烏東嘅居民佢哋向俄羅斯求救，咁但係咧就時機未成熟咧，普丁一直咧都冇咩行動嘅咁。另外一方面咧，就係呢個喺呢個布列辛斯基嘅時代咧，咁搞錯咗，唔係布列辛斯基，而係戈巴卓夫 ，OK， 改翻正先。北約咧係同蘇聯咧係簽咗呢個條約，就係嗰個北約係唔會向東擴展嘅。咁但係咧就係佢哋係唔守承諾啊嘛，咁佢哋北約咧就不停咧收新嘅會員，咁即係話咧嗰個北約嘅勢力咧一路都係喺度向東擴張緊，以至到咧就普丁咧就坐立不安嘅咁嘅時候，咁到2020年拜登上台，咁佢見到美國勢弱嘅時候咧，佢即刻就有行動要去拯救烏東嘅俄裔居民，同埋咧要喺烏東地區咧就建立起一個緩衝地帶，就係避免同北約咧有直接嘅呢個接壤，亦都係要剷除喺烏東地帶嘅40幾間生化實驗室，而呢啲生化實驗室咧全部都係由西方民主文明國家資助起，同埋喺度研究啲生化武器嘅一啲實驗室嚟嘅。呢個就係普丁出兵嘅呢一個原因，佢已經喺佢嘅出兵宣言嗰度已經交代得非常之清楚㗎啦。OK， 咁但係咧，我溫馨警告一下先嚇，呢個羅伯甘乃迪咧嗰把聲咧就非常之難聽嘅，一把爛鑼聲咧就可能會驚嚇到大家嚇，咁即係大家忍耐一下啦咁。咁如果話係天生一把爛鑼聲嘅話咧，我睇怕佢都唔會選到美國總統嘅，因為你諗下，如果話佢成為咗美國總統嘅時候，佢要國民知情嘅時候，咁我哋要聽佢1-2個鐘頭嘅國民知情嘅話咧，呢個係一個非常之呢個係酷刑嚟嘅可以話，所以咧佢一把咁嘅爛鑼聲咧，咁嗰啲人係唔會想聽佢講嘢嘅咁。同埋咧，佢個言論係非常之得意嘅嚇，佢嘅言論嘅方向咧就同我哋呢邊 MAGA 呢邊 Donald Trump 呢邊係非常之相似嘅。咁嗱，而家咧就係基於佢係甘乃迪嘅後人啦，咁嘅時候咧就我哋可以諗下，其實呢一個羅伯甘乃迪出嚟競選嘅時候，係咪即係佢係一個界票王嚟嘅咧？暗地裏其實係幫 Donald Trump 界票嘅咧，呢個有可能性嘅喎嚇。咁因為好多時候我哋都會將 Donald Trump 同埋甘乃迪咧就拉埋一齊講㗎嘛。咁嘅時候咧，呢一個2024年嘅總統選舉咧，就真係而家開始咧就越嚟越精彩嚇。裏邊咧就內裏有好多好有趣嘅嘢，咁我哋就慢慢睇。咁但係咧就大家忍耐一下佢把爛鑼聲啦。咁即係聽下佢點樣去講呢個俄烏戰爭呢件事嘅來龍去脈，同埋美國喺呢個世界政治舞台上邊其實喺度扮演緊一個咩角色。咁我哋嚟聽下嚇。
One thing that you talk about a lot in your interviews and your speeches is America being in a permanent state of war and how you want to put an end to that. With regard to Ukraine, how do you propose to do that?
Settle it. I mean, the Russians have repeatedly offered to settle, and particularly, if you look at the Minsk Accords, which the Russians, offered to settle for, that looks like a really good deal today. Oh, it's. I mean, let's be honest. This is a U.S. war against Russia for geopolitical reasons that have been, these geopolitical machinations that have been going on since 2014 with the intelligence agencies and the neocons, and to essentially sacrifice the flower of Ukrainian youth in an abattoir of death and destruction for the geopolitical ambition of the neocons off-stated of deposing of regime change for Vladimir Putin and of exhausting the Russian military so that they can't fight anywhere else in the world. And and President Biden has said that that was his intention, to depose, to get rid of Vladimir Putin. His Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, in April 2022 said, our purpose here is to exhaust the Russian army. Well, what does that mean, exhaust? It means throwing Ukrainians at them. And, the young, my son fought over there side by side with the Ukrainians. And, we've sacrificed 300,000 Ukrainians. The commander of the Special Forces unit in the Ukraine, which is probably the most elite and the best fighting force in Europe, arguably, has said that 80% of his troops are dead or wounded, and that they cannot rebuild the unit. Right now, Russians are killing Ukrainians at a ratio of either 1 to 5 or 1 to 8, depending on what data you believe.
If you became president, you would inherit the situation as it is. So although there might be missteps in the past that you regret, the situation as it is, that both sides are very dug in. Public opinion in most of Ukraine is now very violently against Russia and vice versa. There is a front. What would the policy actually be to basically say territory that Russia has already conquered they can keep, and you would then be accused of surrendering?
Well, what I'm accused of is irrelevant to me, as you may have figured out by now. Let's do what's sensible, no matter what I'm accused of. Let's do what makes sense, what saves lives. This was supposed to be a humanitarian mission. That's how they sold it to us in the United States. But that would imply that the purpose of the mission was to reduce bloodshed and to shorten the conflict. And every step that we've taken has been to enlarge the conflict and to maximize bloodshed. That's not what we should be doing. If you look at the Minsk Accords, it sets the groundwork for a final settlement. In the Minsk Accords, the Donbass region, which is 80% ethnic Russian, and Russians that were being systematically killed by the Ukrainian government, would become autonomous within Ukraine and would be protected. And I would say, let's protect those populations with a United Nations force or whatever we have to do to make sure the bloodshed stops. In addition to that, we need to remove our Aegis missile systems which can house the Tomahawk missile, which is a nuclear missile 70 miles from the Russian border. When the Russians put nuclear missiles in Cuba, 1,500 miles from Washington, D.C., we were ready to invade them, and we would have invaded them if they hadn't removed them. So, and the way they got removed ultimately is my uncle and father made a deal with Ambassador Dobrynin and Khrushchev, who they had a close relationship with and they could talk directly to at that point. And they said, the deal was, we will remove our Jupiter missiles from Turkey on your border because we know that's intolerable to you. Russia's been invaded twice in the previous 100 years with the vast cost that we can't even comprehend in the United States. And one could see why they wouldn't want U.S. nuclear missile systems in hostile countries on their border. We should also agree to keep NATO out of the Ukraine, which is what the Russians have asked. And I think based upon those 3 points, we could probably, somebody like me could settle this war. I don't think the neocons are capable of settling it, and the people who surround President Biden, I don't think they're capable of, because they were the ones who created the problems, and I don't think they'll ever recognize that. I think part of a Russian settlement is to recognize that some of some of this history that went into this war with them, with the geopolitical machination on both sides. And by the way, I am not excusing or justifying Vladimir Putin's barbaric and illegal invasion of the Ukraine. I'm just saying we need to figure out a way. My uncle always said, if you want to actually achieve peace, you've got to put yourself in the other guy's shoes, and you got to figure out the pressures, the local pressures on him too.
But what is the wise equivalent thing that the US president should have done when Russian tanks started rolling across Ukrainian borders in 3 different directions headed
Well,
for
I
the
mean,
capital?
we should have listened maybe to Putin over many years. You know, we made a commitment to Russia, to Gorbachev, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Oh, you know, why did we, then we went in and we lied. We went into 13 NATO countries. We put missile systems in that with nuclear capacity. We did joint exercises with the Ukraine and these others from NATO. What is the purpose of NATO? In NATO, this is what George Kennan asked. This is what Jack Matlock asked. All of the the doyens of U.S. foreign policy were saying, Russia lost the Cold War. Let's do to Russia for Russia what we did to Europe when we gave them the Marshall Plan. We're the victors. Let's help them, lift them up. Let's integrate them into European society.
So you would have had Russia inside NATO?
I think that that's something we should have considered. What is the purpose of NATO other than to oppose Russia? And if you're addressing Russia hostilely from the beginning, of course their reaction is going to be a hostile reaction back. And if you're slowly moving in, that all of these states who we said would never become part of NATO, or suddenly become part of NATO, and then and we know what happened to Ukraine. The U.S. Supported essentially a coup d'état in 2014 against a democratically elected government of Ukraine, and we put in place, and we now have the telephone call transcripts. Victoria Nuland, one of the neocons in the White House then, handpicking the new cabinet that was hostile to the Soviet Union. And so, if you look at that and you put yourself in Russia's position and you say, okay, the United States, our biggest enemy, that's treating us as an enemy, has now taken over the government of a nation and made them hostile to us, and then start, passing laws that are prejudicial to this giant Russian population. If Mexico did that and then started killing, they killed 14,000 Russians in Donbass, the Ukrainian government. If Mexico did that to expatriate Americans, we'd invade in a second. So, I think we have to put ourselves in the shoes of our opponents, and it doesn't mean saying that Vladimir Putin is not a gangster. He is. That he's not a thug. He is. That he's not a bully. He is. But going to war is not in his interest either. And he repeatedly told us, these are red lines you're crossing.
The challenge is that we are where we are now, and day by day the news emerges of some of the atrocities happening inside the Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine, and the idea that it's going to slip back to peaceful Minsk-style accords is maybe not realistic at this point. So should we take it from what you're saying that in practice that means your support for NATO as president would be different to what
I don't know but that is something that I'm going to look at as president. I'm going to look at how do we de-escalate tensions between the great powers, between China, between the United States and Russia, and how do we let these countries deal with their neighbors in a way without pressure from the United States that makes them feel like they're going to have to go into a military mode. And I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm saying that's something that we need to look at. And the reason that we need to look at that is we have institutional problems in our country where something my uncle discovered in 1961, when he said what he realized during the Bay of Pigs crisis is that the CIA had devolved into an agency whose function was to provide the military-industrial complex with a constant pipeline of new wars. The 3 top people at the CIA for lying to him But he said at that time, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. We have to recognize that, it's not just our civilian agencies that have been captured by industry. The military agencies, the Pentagon, and particularly the intelligence agencies have been captured by the military-industrial complex. And, and we have to recognize that, and we have to say, okay, we don't want constant wars in our country. We can't afford them.
So do you see yourself finishing the job they started then? Do you want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind?
I think the CIA needs to be reorganized in a way. Most of the people who work at the CIA are patriotic Americans. They're very, very good public servants, and we need them to function. CIA has been involved now in fixing in coup d'etats or attempted coup d'etats in about a third of the countries in the world, most of them democracies. So our national policy as a country is to promote democracy. The CIA's policy has been the opposite, and it has been at odds with the United States. So, and I think part of that, my father recognized this too. His plan was to reorganize the CIA along those lines, to separate the espionage and the analysis and information gathering functions. You overthrow a government in Iraq, and what happens? You create ISIS. You then get involved in Syria from ISIS, and you drive 2 million civilian or 2 million refugees into Europe, which destabilizes democracy all over Europe and basically causes Brexit. And unfortunately, we have a 60-year war with Iraq, and that war began when the CIA overthrew the first democratically elected government in the 6,000-year history of Persia. And we are still living with the blowback from that operation. And there's no accountability, and these agencies need to be accountable, and I would break up the CIA in a way that would make them accountable.
OK，就聽到呢度先啦，因為真係已經係頂唔順佢把聲㗎啦嚇，再聽落去咧就會發猛整㗎啦咁就佢已經係解釋咗俾我哋聽呢個俄烏戰爭嘅前世今生，同埋喺美國嚟講咧，就係因為咧CIA 咧同埋嗰啲做軍火嘅嗰啲公司咧就勾結啦咁樣，所以咧美國咧就陷入咗一個咧係不停戰爭嘅狀態。咁呢個咧就係美國 CIA 而家佢喺呢個世界各地咧就係喺度撩事鬥非搞屎棍，咁令到美國咧就係不停咁樣打仗嚇。所以咧就引起呢個世界嘅公憤啦嚇，咁所以點解有好多國家咧，其實佢哋都係去好憎美國嘅，就係咁解。但係如果主流嘅一啲評論員咧，佢哋就冇辦法連接呢啲點啊，因為佢哋唔相信我哋講嘅呢啲事實啊嘛，係咪？咁佢就係跟住主流嘅咁聞雞起舞嘅時候咧，就將啲假嘅資訊、假嘅新聞咧，就去散佈俾佢嘅大眾啦，咁樣就洗佢哋腦嚇。點到啲大眾陀陀令咁樣，咁就冇辦法啦。咁唯有我哋呢啲好微弱嘅聲音咧，就不停係咁講一啲真實嘅資訊、真實嘅新聞話俾你哋聽。咁希望咧就能夠有越嚟越多嘅人咧就醒覺啦咁樣。